Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Creators Hour at Nikon. I am your host, Mike Corrado. I've been with Nikon for over 35 years and been taking pictures for 40. And I'm hosting interviews and conversations with some really epic photographers. And we've got Mark Edward Harris with us today from the West Coast. Mark, how are you doing?
Fantastic, Michael. In fact, when you said epic photographers, I thought, oh, do you have some other guest today? But I'm glad it happens.
It's you.
I appreciate that. I'm honored.
It's all you, brother. I am so fascinated to have you here today too, and we're happy to have you and sharing images with us. I have seen your work and I followed you through the years, and when I say epic, I mean epic. And you people tuning in are in for a treat when you start to see everything that Mark provided to us today in the way of about 10 or so images. How hard was it to cull down your body of work for the years you've been shooting into a small section of the work that you do?
Well, I always think that's a good exercise because, as Jay Micel said years ago, if you're not your best editor, you're your worst enemy. And so I'm used to that discipline. And but I really thought, because it's such a great assignment, right? I had treated it as an assignment. It's about, okay, what series, what are your defining images? But it's also part of which series have really propelled me the most and inspired me. And so that didn't make it that tough once I decided on those categories. Then I just had to go in and pull the images that I think spoke to that the most.
Yeah, Jay said quite a few prolific things through his career.
Yes,
An amazing photographer as well. The way he sees, the way he describes, the way he teaches, the way he gets people to see things in detail.
For sure. Especially awareness
is just
of color.
phenomenal.
Yeah, that's for
sure.
So
take us back a little bit.
Yeah.
The very first time you picked up a camera.
Yeah.
I always love to hear the backstory from somebody, is where they got started, how that journey kind of grew into, you then becoming the professional that you are, what drives you, what motivates you. But go back to when you picked up the camera for the first time and you knew photography was going to be a part of your life.
Well, I think that's sort of in two segments. One is we were always documenting family trips around the U.S. My dad worked in PR for KCBS radio, and so we would go, and he would, since he was doing PR, he took photos. But he's such an amazing person who I want to discuss a little bit later as well. Because he had a severe case of polio, so he could only use one arm and had severely curved spine, but yet he could shoot photos. He played sports. He did all this stuff, and really produced really strong photos that told a story. But I would just, I would be the second cameraman in a sense. And so I would shoot photos of our trips and document it. Then I would buy postcards in the places we were at. And so I love the concept of freezing a moment in time. And that concept never left me. And then in college, in the darkroom, is where I really discovered photography. I took an extension class. I was a history major, and putting the paper in the developer and seeing this image come up was just unbelievable to me. And that magic has never left me, even for a minute, even though we have, moved on to digital. And I was sort of a late bloomer for that. But that's really how it started. But in the darkroom, and then I could spend hours and hours in a traditional darkroom, 2, 3 in the morning, had the music on, was doing actually real estate photos early on to make money with it. Then there was an opportunity after I got my master's, or I was working during that time anyway for some magazines, newspapers, but got a job with the Merv Griffin show and not everybody, of course, remembers the Merv Griffin show except
I remember Merv.
Right.
Watch Merv Griffin every day.
Right, and he was a great guy, and he also taught me something that worked a lot later in life, which you do so well, which is know how to do an interview, because you really listen to the answers. You don't go down, and for those out there that are doing interviews, listen to the answers and use that as a base for your next question, or sort of maneuver it that way. And so Merv did that so well. And so years later, not knowing that at the time, that would be an important component that I learned when the show ended in '86. So I did the green room on the show, and then I would go out and shoot stills of the celebrities, and then those would get distributed. When that ended, I took off for a few months to try to build up a travel portfolio. So I got what's called a Circle of Pacific plane ticket. Took 4.5 months, and then just hopped through the Pacific all the way up, eventually through Asia, and came back. And then with that portfolio, that was the base for what I started to do, what I love. But also then I assisted a lot, so I could took a lot of classes eventually in college as well. But it was really the assisting that gave me the tools to be a professional photographer, not only technically, but also to see how other photographers worked in a professional arena. So that was really the way to get me started on a regular, path forward with that.
Yeah, I found it fascinating. You went to Cal State U.
Yeah.
When I was doing some research on you, pictorial documentary history.
Yeah.
I found that to be like a fascinating, really, really cool major to have. So you're a history major based on pictures and documentation, documentary aspects of imaging.
Exactly. It was a special major I created with the help of my advisors there, because I didn't want to do just a straight history thing, and I didn't have just a photography course. And so the two combined really merged my loves, my fascination with history and photography. And so to this day, the series that I tend to do have a historical component. And so the stories I generate often have that, just like, when we were coming up on the 70th anniversary of D-Day, didn't try to pitch the story 2 days before. It's like, call somebody on June 4th, say, hey, June 6th is coming up. Can I go do a story? Now you got to think in advance. So I'm always using historic anniversaries as hooks for stories, 6 months in advance that I can then put out. And Eve Arnold, really gave me some great advice when I was doing an interview with her. She said she was always, anxious, like, either overworked or waiting for the phone to ring. And so her In China project, her Epic in China project, started because she wanted a long-term project to smooth out those uneven times. And that became one of her most important bodies of work. And so I think that I've learned to do the same thing. And also I understand that editors want to hear your ideas. That they don't want to just come up with ideas. And I think people, I'm not sure if these days it's always the case, but too many people think that, oh, I'll have a great portfolio and the phone will start ringing. But really, a lot of the time, it's what you come up with your own stories that then you then put out that really put you on the map.
And you've been everywhere. I mean, do you self-assign? I mean, is it a combination of self-assignment and you get assignments? You have agents working for you. How do you decide where you go and when you go?
I might get in trouble for this, but maybe I have agents working against me. It's because agents are trying to do a good job, of course, and there's a lot of good ones out there. But of course, part of what they need to do is the economic situation. When you do it yourself, you have a little more flexibility in terms of saying, yeah, I really want to do this. This isn't, in fact, the Orangutan project is a perfect example. That's something I really wanted to do, and it basically started off pro bono. So it's a combination of the two. I love working on assignments when a phone call comes in or an email. And I love illustrating somebody else's story. But I also will see something in the news. I mean, you think about, one of the greatest photo essays in history was W.G. Smith's Minamata. He saw that in a newspaper or something. He happened to be in Japan doing some exhibitions there. And so he went down, and that really became probably his biggest photo essay. And I think the same sort of thing with me. North Korea came about because of my fascination with history. Vietnam was really my first photo essay where I started to really focus on understanding that you tell a story through a body of images rather than single images. Up until then, maybe I was creating nice images of this and that, getting them published or exhibited or whatever. But I learned that you have to create bodies of work. And at least for me, it's creating ones that, the ones that have been the longest lasting have often been the ones that I've self-assigned.
Right.
Yeah.
And how are you dealing with the fact that as a documentary travel, journalist, photographer, the pandemic, I mean, it's obviously sort of grounded you. And what have you been doing to stay creative during these times?
Yeah. Well, I haven't eaten in 3 days. I mean, this is it. I'm just I've been very fortunate that I understand the ebb and flow of freelance. And so I've been conservative when I've gotten big commercial jobs, to sort of tuck things away for a later day. That later day is here on the economic thing, but it's given me a chance to do a lot of things that maybe I was traveling too much, 200,000 miles a year. And so I thought, okay, why don't I do something around here? And so I've been working on a series on Hollywood Boulevard without the tourists. And so, which really reveals, and so it's called Naked Hollywood. I hope nobody decides that that's a great title that they want to use, but it's a series about Hollywood stripped of tourists. And so that's a concept. So ever since they declared a state of emergency here, I've been going out every day pretty much and documenting life on the street there. And it's pretty rough. And it's really revealed even more without the tourists. Now, sort of a scary way, there are a lot of tourists coming back, and not a lot of them are wearing masks properly. So that's scary things. But that is one of the things I'm doing. I'm also spending about at least 3 to 4 hours a day studying different languages. That's been something that I'm always been a part of my life. It's opened up opportunities, but if not now, when in particular? Because I wasn't getting over the hump with Japanese. I can speak fairly well, but I had a weak foundation. And so I've been doing that. I've been doing intensive Mandarin, and I'm continuing my Korean. So my brain is totally mixed up, but it's moving forward, I got to say, on all those. And also I start every morning with Qigong, which is a Chinese exercise. So I feel like I'm staying fit because the gym is no longer an option. So I actually feel it really goes by that, one door closes, another opens. And
sure.
So
you're making history. I mean, you are a historian, right?
Yeah,
and this whole pandemic is a history, and I can't wait to see that project. But for now, let's go through the images you submitted. Thank you for putting these together. I'm sure they mean a lot to you.
Thank you.
And as I share the screen and open this up, let's get this show rolling. And please tell us all about these pictures, the backstory, the good things that may have happened, some of the challenges you may have had along the way. Think about the lenses that you possibly used, but take it away. What's this first image? What are we looking at?
This is Hanoi in 1992, and growing up with the Vietnam War on television must have had a huge impact. I was very young, but I do remember the scenes. Of course, the scenes of carnage, and I knew something basically was wrong even at a young age with the whole thing. But I was fascinated by it. And then you'd see the beautiful scenes of the villages, all that. And so when I had the opportunity at 1992 to go, and this was a self-assigned thing. Actually, I worked out a deal with a tour operator to give them some photos in exchange for the trip. But this image in particular, this was actually on the first day when I ventured out, landed in Hanoi. It was really, I think, maybe the first environmental portrait, a portrait that tells something about the person by the environment they're in, that really said something. And so, the magic of the film days is you don't see the image as you remember until you get back home and you process it. But everything seemed to come together, and I think it probably was a 28 millimeter lens on was it an FM, maybe? I think Nikon FM. And I think everything sort of works about this, where I was always careful about cropping. If you're going to get close to the feet, make sure you show it. And of course, him being barefoot shows a lot. Nothing's merging with his head. You can see the background. So maybe I was 4.5 or so. So you get a feel for the background, but it's not so out that you really can't feel it, but yet it's not so sharp that it's a distraction. So I think you really stay within the frame, and it tells a story. And so this was part of the bigger story about Vietnam, just on the cusp of reestablishing relations with the U.S. And so this was the first photo essay that really got out there internationally, that really had sort of my sort of feel and my attitude toward things on it. And so I mixed it up with, the usual elements that make, I think, a strong photo essay. And an environmental portrait is one of those elements when it's a people-oriented story, for sure.
So you basically were inspired by the news or things going on in current events at the time, and you came up with this idea to get there and then look for a little bit of support.
Exactly. I mean, I think I would have gone either way. And to be honest with you, the final kick in the derriere to do it was I happened to be in London and I saw Miss Saigon, and I said, okay, I'm going now. I mean, I love that story. I had read Grant Green's The Quiet American. I mean, there were so many things, but also, as I said, growing up during the Vietnam War and seeing that, it just was always in my mind. And so it was just a question of when. And so then 1992 became when worked out well. And the irony is, years later, because of the series I do on interviewing photographers, I met the most important photographer of that conflict, which was Nick Oud. And that's, another story, but what an inspiration he is on so many levels. But
our good friend Nicky, yes,
great friend for sure.
Yeah, really good friends, and he shot a very famous image of that naked little Vietnamese girl running down the block after napalm.
Exactly,
they called Napalm Girl.
That's
Have
right.
you been back to Vietnam since then?
Oh, many times. In fact, we did a documentary with Nick. Actually, for Vanity Fair, I did a story on Nick, and also the other people that were still alive in that photo, and so actually people could find that story. So I've been back at least 4 or 5 times, and it's a totally different world now. I mean, it is so modern. It's incredible. And the honor of going back with Nick, I think 3 times there. And so we will have next year a documentary out called From Hell to Hollywood about Nick's journey through life, not just what got him to that place at that time, but just like with you, those stories, how these things come together, how the person's at the right place at the right time, just endless source of fascination. And then that moment of, the ability of the camera to freeze a moment in time really is magical to me. And so there's people like Ellen von Unwerth who love, to show movement in the camera by shooting a little bit slower shutter speed. I love the concept that a camera can freeze a moment in time. So it's very rare that I will show a photo. When I shoot a long exposure, it's because, going after the comet and the stars, a couple of weeks ago, or a shot of nature where nothing's moving. But when it comes to people, it's a fast shutter speed. I want to freeze that moment in time so we can examine it later.
Well, this is a fascinating picture. I've actually been to Vietnam. I was on a shoot with Beth Wall, the rock climber. We were doing a Nikkor ad piece for Nikon, and it was one of the toughest places to be because of the heat and humidity.
Yeah.
And I was begging to get out of there. Yeah. And as soon as I left, I need to go back. So this is one of my bucket list places to go back on my own. It's beautiful, beautiful country. And I'm going to be calling Nicky Oud out because he told me he was bringing me to Vietnam, and obviously you've taken 3 of my slots to go over to Vietnam. So I'm not gonna make any more of it at this point. But we'll give Nicky
except that he actually said to me, "Mark, we only have 1 more space, and I can."
Yeah, you took
your mic, and
I appreciate you.
Sorry about that. I shouldn't have admitted it live, right? But
beautiful.
We should all go together. Actually, just say, let's all go together.
All right. Let's put Vietnam aside now.
Okay.
But yes, we will go back
temporarily. Okay. So this is in Madro in the Marshall Islands, and so this ended up as a cover of one of my books called Wonderlust. Ironically, years later, I was doing a story on Micronesian migration, and ended up in the same space. And maybe I ran into these kids years later, but this was in '97 and probably shot with an FM2, could have been an FE, but that's the amazing thing about film. We don't have metadata, right? But it was, so the lens wise, my normal way of working was to have 2 camera bodies, one with a 28 and one with 85 and sort of prowl the streets. Obviously this would be more toward the 28 range. And then this is one of those photos again that I didn't see till 3 weeks later. I put the film back in the lead bag, and I didn't see it for 3 or 4 weeks until I got back to the States and it was processed. So no concept, because your eye can't freeze this. I mean, obviously I was aware the kids were flipping. That's why I photographed it. But no concept that everything came together and the kid happened to be in the foreground like that. Nobody blocked anybody. And so this, I don't think I've ever grown up in a way. So maybe I'm a kid too. And so maybe I'm living vicariously through them in a way. But it was just a beautiful moment in time. I love daily life and documenting daily life. I mean, there's so much stuff that goes on that's rough, and that's very important to document. And I have documented that. but 99.9% of the time, at least that percentage, people are just trying to go about their daily lives and just live it. And so I think this is a little snippet of that. They're not thinking about, global warming, that their island, which is barely above sea level, could disappear. I mean, those are real issues that are addressed. And when I went back years later, we documented that aspect. But this is just about kids being kids. And I think that gets that across there.
Full of energy. I love the layering. And like you said, the big advantage, nowadays, shoot, review. Some would refer to that as chimping, right?
Yeah.
But to capture a moment like this, were you running a motor drive on your FM too, or is this just one
not
click
at
of a
all.
frame? Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
One at a time. I obviously, motor drives for certain situations, but when I was doing a sort of reportage kind of, shooting out there, I would just do a single frame and then, shoot another. And plus, in those days, with carrying, film for a really extended trip, I did not want to be what the French, I think, refer to as a mitraillette, a machine gunner at all. I really, there are whole, in France, it's interesting having interviewed a lot of French photographers. They talk about, you go out fishing for a shot. They never say you go out hunting for a shot. You go out fishing for a shot and you never know what you're going to catch. And there's sort of that sort of concept of you have to earn the photo by really looking and really seeing. I mean, it goes back to, of course, that, Cartier-Bresson decisive moment too. Some people think that, with a motor drive, and there's definitely a time for that. I mean, when I photographed the Indy 500, that motor drive was almost caught fire. But this is just, I don't know if my mind's eye was actually able to see that instant. Who knows? But but it was just that single frame. I mean, of course, I sat there for a while and I shot, and then moved on. It wasn't just shooting one frame and leaving. It was hanging out for a while, being part of the scene, so they could go back to doing what they were doing that attracted me and my camera in the first place.
A beautiful, beautiful frame.
Thank you.
Very important person in our world. Yeah, who is this?
This is Alfred Eisenstadt, and this is part of a series that was in my first book. But before that, I was doing interviews for photo magazines. One of the camera magazines was saying, we want to find a photographer who can actually write. And I had written about other things earlier for photo magazines, and actually found the pen a very important tool for photographers to help get your stories out. And so I had the honor of meeting Izzy, and this was on his 95th birthday at the Time Life building. And I said, could I do a portrait of you? And so we went outside. Marianne Cornelli, who was with Life Picture Sales, I asked her to hold a reflector to kick some light back, and I lined them up. And so we had that light hitting the building in the background. And he called me up a few days later, and in his voice, and you know his voice, he says, unbelievable. Even though he had left Germany in 1933, never left, or in the early 30s, he never lost that accent. But wow, to hear from him that he really thought this was an important shot was so humbling, to say the least. And so when he passed away a few years later, I got a call, I think it was from Bobby Baker Burroughs, saying, and I said, hi, how are you? Great to hear you, whatever. We talked. She goes, well, look, Mark, I'm not calling you, a social call or whatever, but Izzy passed away. But his favorite photo of himself was the photo you did, and we want to run it as a full-page tribute to him. And so we did. And so I do want to, for those who don't know his most famous photo, and I don't expect people to, because photographers are behind the camera. And so a few people obviously we know out there, but this is his most famous shot right there, as we know, right? At the end of World War II, the sailor kissing a nurse. But I really want to, and so this is from my book of interviews. After I had done a whole bunch, we did a compilation of them. But this, to me, is the most amazing environmental portrait, since we talked about environmental portraits a moment ago. This is half a year after the attack in Hiroshima, the atomic bomb. But look at that powerful environmental portrait. That is just, everything comes together in that. And so I often cite that when I'm teaching workshops about all the elements that really convey. I mean, the fact that the hair is still going across her face, and now 70 something years later, we still feel that cold wind to do that. And so Izzy, he walked to work every day. He had such a great energy. very impressive person. And so he's one of my mentors for sure. No doubt about that.
I love the way you describe this too, and that, that's such an important thing, and I don't want to understate it, that you're looking at the background, you look at the reflections, you're moving him into the right spot. This isn't just go stand there. You're thinking about every aspect of this frame as you're piecing it all together. So yet there's such a simplicity to it, that it's right there. I mean, it's just such a beautiful moment. I guess emotionally, you get that call. It says, this is one of his favorite photos, and we're going to be using it. That's got to make you feel super inside.
Well, that's. I mean, I've been so fortunate to have worked with, as you have, so many amazing photographers, and so that really was humbling to hear that, and so to see this moment and shoot it, having no concept of what would happen, later on. Really was something, but I used the frame as a canvas, and so I really tried to look, when I was assisting one of the photographers I assisted with, said take a look around the whole image with your eye very quickly. I mean, so I do treat every frame as a canvas. Does this belong here? Do you so if you move a little bit left, will you avoid something that's distracting? A little bit right. I really don't like to. If you shoot for travel magazines, certain ones might allow you to take a cigarette butt out or this or that, but I really am old school, where capture it in camera when you can. And so this is one of those moments that all, came together. It doesn't always work that way. And you have to be flexible too. Sometimes you have a preconceived notion and you get there and it's like, hey, this isn't working. Maybe if I do have a fault, sometimes maybe I'll work one situation too much. And the neat thing about workshops is you see somebody else doing a different angle. So wow, that's a great idea. Mm-hmm. So it goes both ways. But I think when you treat your frame as a canvas, you really will then take a look around the whole frame, and you'll end up with a much stronger photo. And also, I think the thing that separates a lot of pros from amateurs is pros really use their f-stops. That is a key thing. I mean, everybody understands if your shutter speed is too slow, you're going to get a blur. But not everybody thinks about, depth of field and how that affects that. And with the, SLRs, that you're actually looking through your lens at the widest aperture. And so something that was not distracting in a background might be very distracting when you actually depress the shutter and it goes to an f-stop, like all of a sudden you're at f11, f16. It's like, well, wait a second, that, palm tree wasn't growing out of that person's head, later on. And so I do think about things like that all the time, and very quickly. I mean, I think that's about knowing your tools. I mean, we're not in a life or death situation with photography normally at all, but like a surgeon knows these tools, anybody else who's a professional knows their tools. A photographer shouldn't be an exception to that at all.
Absolutely. And it's the basic fundamentals, like you say, understanding the apertures and shutters and how to use a lens, create dominance within a frame, frame it up the way you want to. But again, I think you and I share this passion. I love photographing photographers, and they are the toughest people to photograph because you want to make that great photograph of them. But we know who this is. And I'm going to say to everybody out there, look up these names: Jay Maisel, Nick Ut, Alfred Eisenstadt, all these names that you're coming up with. This is a great homework for everybody that doesn't know those names. There's some great history in photography with these people. But we've got a beautiful portrait of one of my favorite people, Gordon Parks. Talk about Gordon.
Well, it's funny because I sort of first became aware of him by not being aware of him, because, growing up when I did, a movie that I loved, that I watched, was Shaft. And a lot of people don't realize that he actually directed the original Shaft, not the later one, though he did do a cameo in the more recent film. But Shaft was a very important film. It was early 70s or late 60s, early, for sure 70s. But Gordon was an amazing person, and not only as a photographer, but as a filmmaker and a writer. And I wish I could say, and I'm going to give a shout out to it. His book, Voices in the Mirror, should be suggested or mandatory reading in every high school. The way he rose above the horrible prejudice that was going on when he was starting his career. I mean, I want to mention some of the magazines that he told me about. People can read about that later, but major magazines wouldn't hire him because he was African American, but then others would. And so he did great photo essays for Life. He did a lot of fashion for Harper's Bazaar. He did all sorts of amazing work. But earlier on, he worked with the FSA, for the Farm Security Administration. And he's from Fort Scott, Kansas, and faced a lot of racism there. And actually now what's interesting, at the community college there, or at the college there, they have a museum that if anybody's even remotely within the area, they should go to. And so I did on an assignment, make a little detour and went and visited the museum. But he had a way, and if you read the book, of rising above things, not being unaware of the reality of it. But at the Farm Security Administration, Roy Stryker gave him an assignment to put down his camera and go from one place to another, and then come back and report what happened. And then he faced the prejudice there that he didn't expect in Washington, D.C. And so then he came, and then he said, okay, then Roy said, go out and shoot a photo that reflects how you feel. And that's how this photo came about, which obviously is a nod to American Gothic. And so this text is from my interview with him about it. And so also he's got the back cover, which is of Muhammad Ali. But an amazing person that people should, unfortunately we don't have the time to go super in depth about Gordon, but really an amazing person who just, and part of, I think, what happens is, which I alluded to a little bit earlier, is seeing my dad and his severe polio, which I used to not talk about earlier, but that, you can do two things, and he did, he just, from the iron lung to getting out and really doing having an amazing full life. I mean, I don't know how he did the sports he did. He used to fungo with me out in the streets, how he, with one, arm that just sort of dangled, could sort of throw up the ball so he could hit with one arm, play golf with one arm. Just amazing, photograph, and never any excuses. So I grew up that way. I grew up with, you just do whatever you do and you work hard. And so there's certain stresses with that too. And I know you're very involved with kids, and I love what you're doing, with the kids. And I photograph, we're not showing any of these today, but kids with handicaps, other things, and adults actually in Japan. I've done a whole big project there. It really is something that when people are not handed a full deck and they work so hard, and up in Hokkaido, actually in northern Japan, has been a series I've done of a whole place that has physically handicapped people, and have made a village of it. I just so impressive to see people do that, and Gordon epitomizes that. What he has gone through is just not right, to say the least. But he rose above it, and this is opposite the UN, so he had a view of the UN. And the reason I shot him with a mirror behind him is because of Voices in the Mirror. I sort of did a little nod to that film. But he was an incredible guy.
How fulfilling is it, though? I mean, pictures of Izzy, pictures of Gordon Parks. Yeah. These are the truest, of the true within photography, the best of the best, the history within photography, within these people that you're photographing. How does that make you feel to know that you had that moment to make these photos?
Oh, it's, I'm so fortunate to have done it. I don't use the word lucky because too much work goes in for it to be pure chance. So fortunate. And I've picked up things from all of them, and hopefully I convey a sense of who they are, what they are, and yeah, by now maybe I've done 500 interviews or so, and so it all ties in with the history. It's humbling, but as you know, these people are just people too, and they want to convey their stories, and that's from like Salgado or Annie Leibovitz or Mary Ellen Mark or Sadao Keita. I mean, anybody. In fact, you interviewed a little while ago somebody who I thought, who I had met, who has the same name as a famous photographer that I had met with Sadao Keita in Malike Salih. I can't pronounce his name. Salibe.
Sadibe, yeah.
Yeah, he has the same name as somebody. I thought, oh my God, you're having the same person I met. Is he still alive? But I didn't think so. So, and he mentioned that in your broadcast. He goes, a lot of people confuse me with that name, but it's like, wow. When we talk with these people and we hear their backstories, it's amazing. So yeah, it's humbling, but it's also inspiring. And I really try to focus on the task at hand and make sure the front eye is sharp. That I have the right exposures, that I don't let awe get in the way of a strong photo.
No, that's so important. This picture reminds me of so many people I met at the Eddie Adams workshop, because they were all friends with Eddie Adams, another person to look up, and Joe Rosenthal and Carl Maidens, and so many great photographers that volunteered their time at that workshop. But Gordon is just probably, again, one of my favorite people. John White, Nick Good.
Oh, for sure. Who you just had. The thing you did with John was fantastic. I saw that.
John is a great interview. Yeah. If you haven't seen it, please, people, go back and watch it. Really very spiritual nature, not just photography. It's all about the spirituality of people. And I love the term that he uses, using the camera to give somebody some bodiness. Give them, that just that make them somebody. And so beautiful.
That's for sure.
I want to ask you, how many books have you done? Because you've done quite a few.
That's true. Well, 8 books, and 3 of them have had second editions, and now this Japanese hot spring one is now in its 3rd edition.
I was going to say, this is part of a book that you did, right?
Right, exactly. It's called The Way of the Japanese Bath, which, I guess it's like with kids, you're not supposed to have favorites, but I've got to say, if I had to pick one, this would be the one. The Way of the Japanese Bath sort of fell into accidentally in 1992 or so in a town called Beppu, which happens to be the epicenter of bathing culture. If you could only go to one town, it probably would be Beppu on the southern island of Kyushu, which actually happens to be the same island where Minamata is, where W. Gene Smith did his amazing photo essay. But the Japanese bath, is amazing, because when you're looking for a photo essay, if you talk to a photo editor, they'll say a location is not a story. You have to go into something. If you love jazz and you go to Paris, don't say, hey, I'm going to Paris, I want to do story. Maybe do something on the jazz clubs. And so for the Japanese bath, you have Jody Cobb, who did an amazing thing on geisha, but she didn't just stick at geisha, right? She went into the maiko, which are geisha in training, and she really went deep into it. And so for the Japanese bath, without speaking Japanese at a decent level, there's no way I could have shot this. This particular photo is of a friend of mine. Often the baths are separated into men and women's side, and then there's some which are called a konyoku, where there's men and women together. Sometimes I would get permission, could we shoot this? And they would say, oh, come before the opening. And then I would tell the people, just do what you normally do. And as Mary Ellen Marks said, you can never do better than reality. And I really believe that. And so just her taking a bath and then sitting outside, cooling down a bit, everything just, came together. And so, this series has evolved from first shooting in film for the first edition entirely, to the second edition having some film, some digital, to the third edition, which is maybe 50-50 now, because I've pulled some of the oldest images still have made their way to the latest edition. But there's a seamlessness to it. With the incredible, digital these days, we sort of have to pull it back a little bit, and some people, add some grain to keep a consistent effect. But the subtleties and the shadows and things that you can have these days are just unbelievable.
Dynamic range is incredible, and you can do so much more. I was going to ask you,
you
made that transition. You probably shot, back in the day when it was all black and white, and, rolled into color. And then you roll into digital. Do you feel like there are advantages in digital for you? For me, I love monochrome modes. I love being able to shape the files, and picture controls and things like that. And to see the shot in black and white, again, you mentioned what you see when you're out there. You don't know what you got, but when you're looking through that camera, everything's in color back in the day, right? So if you're shooting black and white film, you'd have to kind of imagine that as well. Talk about that just a little bit.
Well, a couple of times I've gone into picture style and put black and white, to see that. Typically I'll just shoot, color, and and then just converted to black and white later. I mean, there was that transitional time when we had to shoot with 2 camera bodies, one loaded with film, one loaded with black and white, one with color film, and that was really tough, especially if it was color slide film, which I really never cared for. The big thing for me was probably around 2005, 2006, even though digital had come of age. You know, at first there was, you know, with the lower end cameras, you know, a little bit of a shutter drag and all that. But 2005, 2006, everything like that had disappeared. And I matched files shot between digital and film, and the digital was blowing it away. And also, you know, going through airports, it became a real issue to be carrying a bunch of film. And then when I started my North Korea project, I didn't want to show up with, you know, 50, 100 rolls of film. That would have really not been a good issue. But when I did move to digital, it was for a specific purpose, and I've never gone back. It's fantastic, you know, to see. It's also opened me up. I mean, there's something I shot the other day that I think India, this magazine called Better Photography, is going to run a big feature on it, where I shot a Joshua Tree with the stars. If I didn't have the feedback of digital, that guessing game, I mean, that star, you know, I would have to wait, what, 6,800 years for another chance to shoot the comet? I mean, that's a long time. I mean, odds are I won't be here to shoot it again. But
well, I'm not going to let it go by without adding 2 more people to the list, Mary Ellen Mark and Jody Cobb, for people to go check out if they don't know those names, know the work. Both incredible photographers, again, the best of the best. And Jody was a pioneer for many women in journalism. Mary Ellen Mark was just such an inspiration as a photographer. People, check out these names. I mean, this is a great, I mean, just a great list that we're building as we go here.
Yeah.
Obviously,
and people that came up with their own stories as well, which you had mentioned earlier. They didn't sit around. I mean, when Mary Ellen Mark did Indian Circus or Twins or anything else, this is things she's generating. Right, so this one right here, you know, in Chinese they use, you know, yin and yang. In Japanese it's inyo, or is it inro? I think it's inyo, which is the opposites. And unfortunately, the things that give us the Japanese bath give us earthquakes and tsunamis, because 10% of all volcanic activity takes place in and around Japan. And so that's the unfortunate reality. They build their buildings so well. I mean, I got there just after this, and I was in what's called a Yoshin, aftershock. There was a 7.1 that lasted for 6 minutes, and I was on the 16th floor of a building. I mean, that was a wake-up call that's like, hey, I'm really here, because it was the first night I got there. And so, you know, I was like, okay, I got to get out there, start shooting. And so that morning we were evacuated from a hotel, got to the parking lot, slept in a parking lot, glad that nothing was over us. But since the buildings are built well, they can withstand earthquakes. But then the tsunami came in and devastated the coastal areas of Tohoku, of northeast Tohoku. And so this photo, we were, a friend of mine who works for Japan Tourist Organization or private company, JTB, I asked him, would he be willing to drive up with me, because all transportation was stopped to this area? And he said yes. So we drove, and then we came across this in a town called Otsuchi, which a lot of people had shot this, but they were shooting up at it. And I thought, well, if you climb, and this is this astral projecting sort of thing, which I try to do. I thought, okay, if I climb up on the seawall or the tsunami wall, and I move across to an angle, I could shoot it at an angle that I think will work better. And so I did that. And so I crawled across, photographed it, crawled back down, got off, moved on. Now, 5 years later, I did I pitched a story, and those photos ran, and then pitched a story to Vanity Fair about doing a follow-up about, you know, what's gone on in the last 5 years. And so because of digital, I was able to, because I had contacted somebody in Otsuchi, and they said, okay, here's a basic schedule we can do. And so we'll get to Otsuchi where that ship was, you know, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, this and that. But I went into the metadata, and I saw exactly how I shot it, exactly what time I shot it, what lens I used, aperture, and I went back and shot from the same angle at the same time with the same exposures, and it was roughly the same time of year. And so that was incredibly helpful for that. And obviously by this time, this happened in 2011, I was well into the color world at this time. But that's one of the advantages of the metadata. And I really encourage anybody who doesn't know it, go into your file info and look at it, and look at not only the photos that succeed, but look at the photos that fail, that didn't quite work, and look at your settings. Go to homework on your own images. A very important thing to do. But they also work in this sort of, the now and then sort of thing to really figure things out. You don't have to reinvent the wheel each time.
Beautiful. Well, great backstory here. Tough situation, I'm sure. Yeah. As we roll on, I absolutely love this picture. And it's not that I don't love the other pictures that you've shared so far. There's just something about this moment that I would love for you to talk about. That it's just such a powerful picture, very simple in colors, but again, it's just so, I have to know what's going on here.
Well, this is in Pyongyang, North Korea, and so it's always difficult to photograph there anyway, because they want you to sort of go by a program. We're going to go from here to here to here to here. But during in 2008, the New York Philharmonic was invited to go there. But because of my work that had started in 2006, I was invited to document it, and so it's an amazing opportunity. And so there was a little more leniency for the official journalists, but I kept begging each day when we would go from the hotel to the rehearsal hall. I would say, could we please stop? I want to photograph the traffic officer. Oh, no, we got to get there. You never do it. So I figured, okay, Rhapsody in Blue is about 17 minutes long. I could get out of the rehearsal hall, get this photo, and then get back, because you're not supposed to go without somebody with you. And so I timed it. So I had the music. I love that, the Gershwin piece. And so I had that in my head playing as I was making my way very quickly down to this corner. I knew how I wanted to shoot it. I had a Nikon speed light, and I held it off to the left to soften the shadows in her face. And now it was fortuitous. It may be lucky. Okay, maybe I could admit, using the word luck, that the bus that's also blue came by at that instant. Now, she was saying some things, and at that time I didn't speak Korean. They probably would have to be censored if I had heard them. She was not too thrilled that I was out there, but she still had to do her work. But most people, extremely nice. I'm sure she's extremely nice, but not supposed to be out in the middle of traffic doing a photo session. But at that time, a lot of traffic lights didn't work. Now, Pyongyang, traffic lights, people can go by cars, there's taxis. It's pretty amazing how, in spite of all the things that are going on, and there's a lot of money coming from China. They actually have a casino up in the northeast corner. So a lot of hard currencies coming in that is, including dollars that's filtering down to that. But this moment in time was something I really worked for. A lot of things are spontaneous. This is one I've got to say I worked for very hard, and I do feel good about it. But I still had to keep all the things in mind. If I was a little bit too tight about her, near her boots, and I cut off that snow in the foreground, that would have dragged us down to the bottom of the frame. So by keeping that, the snow, it helped keep us within the frame. I mean, sometimes you want to create tension, by having something leading you out of frame. This is not one of those cases.
And it's so important, again, to reiterate, look at the entire frame when you're shooting, not just the main subject. And certainly in moments where they're fleeting, you take the picture and you just, you go with what you can get. But when you have the time to see the frame, I mean, phenomenal. And
thank you so much.
Love repetition. Love repetition in photos. Where are we here? I was going to guess maybe an Olympic ceremony or something
similar
like
for
that,
sure.
But
So this is again in Pyongyang. This is the Arirang Mass Games. And so these are, they call them games as if they're sports games. Incredible athletic activity goes on there, but it's actually just a big celebration in North Korea, the DPRK. And the way they sync. Now, this also sort of brings up something about color temperature. We really have to think about color temperature as what's right for that situation. They were using blue gels for the lighting. Now I could have, tried to get a white balance that would have made it white, but the goal is not having a white piece of paper white. The goal is to have whatever sets the mood for the situation. Now I shoot raw, and so obviously I could get back to different, colors if I needed to, but just like, let's say like a romantic scene, you don't want to shoot that cool, you want to shoot that nice and warm. And so you say, okay, you want to be much warmer. And people say, oh, I'll just fix all that later. But when you have mixed scenes, just like when we're talking about that last shot, I probably had a quarter CTO over the flash to warm it up a little bit. So often when I use my speed light off camera like that, I will adjust it. Obviously this flash is used. This is where you bump up the ISO. I think it was a 180, which helped compress the image. But it's about color temperature and thinking about what do you want to get across in terms of color. And so this worked for it. This was their real color. I wasn't going to argue with it. It just worked. And so this is really all about them doing this amazing symmetrical dance and capturing it correctly.
As you flew through that, CTO is color temperature orange.
Oh, sorry.
For those of you
Sorry about that.
that kind of buzzed through the acronym. What did you just say? McNally, Joe McNally. Every time I shoot with him, I hear CTO.
Oh my
CTO.
God, is he a guru? I've watched his videos. Yeah, for those who don't look at his stuff, please do. You'll see how to be creative with multiple light setups. But CTO,
Phenomenal.
CTB, become familiar with those. Yeah, but also increments of them, not just a full CTO. Quarter CTO, you can adjust to flavor to taste. I guess that's what it is.
Absolutely. Well, again, beautifully done. And I know we're going to finish off the interview on your orangutan story. Yeah, another great story. I feel like you have a million stories that you're juggling constantly. But talk about this picture, why you chose it. Thank you again for everything you've showed so far. But what's going on here? Talk about this project.
Well, I think, you guys did a fantastic story about that. Maybe people could read more detail about the whole series. But basically, orangutans are in danger in the wild. They only survive in Borneo and Sumatra. So that's those major parts of that are just in Indonesia. And then there's a Malaysian section of Borneo as well. And there's some orangutans there. And so there's a new book called The People of the Forest, and that's what orangutan means, orangutan, people of the forest. This was actually shot through double plexi or another type of glass, and I lit it from the side to avoid the reflection. But they are so camera aware, it's unbelievable. And this was on an assignment to photograph in Indianapolis, was not specifically about orangutans, but I had so much success with this, and then I started to do research and understand the huge issues they have that are complicated with palm oil, but it's more, and forest clearing. And so this slowly evolved, and then I got an email from somebody at the Borneo Orangutan Survival Foundation, and they said, would you like to come and do a pro bono thing? And that's what I was talking about earlier about the pro bono. And so I went to Borneo to shoot that, and that opened things up even more. Then I've gone to shoot orangutans that were in circuses and private ownership that were in horrible situations. I mean, that they grew, they're cute when they're little, then they grow big and people don't know what to do with them. So they stick them in their garages or basements in tiny cages. It's horrendous. And so this series hopefully will help talk about that more. But they share basically 97% of the same DNA. I believe chimpanzees have even more, 98%. But there's 5 great apes, and we're one of them. Humans, orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas. And so we have so much in common, and we actually have more in common with orangutans than orangutans have with gorillas. It's very interesting, the dynamics of the DNA. And so my goal here was really to try to, and these are fleeting moments. They're not sitting there in a photo session just hanging there shooting. This is a split second they look, and then something else distracts them and they move on. And so the magic of the flash, of course, is you can capture that moment when you're looking. And so there's a lot of frames that don't work, but then there's a few that do. And so I try to keep shooting where I am a machine gunner to a point with this until I get the shot that works, and then I go into the next orangutan. But they're really something, and they could go extinct within a generation if we don't stop the clear cutting of forests there.
So important, which makes these pictures even that much more important. How long have you been working on this project?
It started in 2014. I shot a few frames, but it really got started in 2018 was when I went back specifically to shoot this. So 2014 or so was when I first found out about them, when I was doing a general story on Indianapolis, and then went back specifically for the orangutans to the orangutan center there, and then to Florida, to Japan, to other sanctuaries for the orangutans, and then to Borneo 2 times so far. And I'd love to get to Sumatra. Right now, obviously, there's a bit of a hold on international travel. But hopefully we'll have a book out next year, and then that will continue on, just like the Japanese bath book. First edition hopefully doesn't mean the end of the series, and the second edition doesn't mean the same book again. It means more photos and continuing on, and hopefully it has some impact. I mean, you could see with Amy Vitelli and the amazing work she does with, rhinos and pandas. It does have an effect. People become aware of
giraffes, elephants. She's doing it all. And
oh my
again,
God!
And else to look up here. Add to the list now. Amy
We got
Vitelli,
a big list here, and I have more too.
But
Michelle Velberg was on the other day. Yeah.
Oh, Michelle Velberg.
Yeah, and all of the people you have are amazing. People should really make it during this time. As I said, one door closes, another opens. Take a look at every one of these episodes. You gain from every one of them. Carol was amazing. Lindsay was amazing. One after Jordan was amazing. I mean, one Michael Jordan Smith. Yeah, one after another. Amazing.
Yeah, Matthew was amazing.
Matthew, rather. I'm sorry, Matthew.
We just want to bring inspiration. Exactly what you're doing right here is so good. So as we wind down, what's this picture about? Obviously part of the same orangutan story.
Yeah, that's correct. And this is at the Borneo at the Borneo Orangutan Survival Foundation. And these are all orphan chips. They're often what happens is poachers will kill the mothers in order to pull the babies and then try to sell the babies to circuses, to private ownership. It's a horrendous thing. And so what they do is this woman is a surrogate mother, and she trains them. Believe it or not, it's not automatic that they know how to climb or know how to get termites with little sticks, as tools. And so they go to a forest school and learn the techniques. And so this is the path into the forest school. And it's very fortunate to capture this. This was with a 70-200. And maybe I was pre-focusing, either I would be on continuous focus, or I might have pre-focused on that. You can see that sort of separation in the wood, in the path. And it sounds like me that I would focus on that and let them come into frame and then hit it with a motor drive. And fortunate they all had to look at the same time. And also, once again, this is about depth of field, because if all of a sudden you're not paying attention and you're at F11, F16, there's going to be too much information back there. You want the feel of the background, but not let it drag you back there.
Correct, because detailing all those leaves back there would take you away from, it would distract you from the foreground, certainly.
That's right.
And so well done. This has been great, Mark. I got to tell you, as much as I've looked at your work and have seen you through the years and watch you present, pretty phenomenal to see this and hear all the backstories. And so many photographers I really love and appreciate. And one of the things I appreciate, which I'm hearing in you, all the details about what you've done. You remember, the people that were involved and the things that you were shooting in those moments. And I think that's so important if you don't have it in your memory banks, write things down when you're shooting in those moments. And like you say, go back to the metadata for the technical, but to be able to tell the stories afterwards. I'm so grateful that you have had the time to come on with us. So thank you for your time. Let me bring you back full screen.
Thank you. And I will, if I can mention a couple of more photographers that are so important in history, Nikon in history to me, and that I had the good fortune to work with. Horace Bristol, who introduced David Douglas Duncan to June Mickey, which were instrumental in the history of Nikon, because he started putting his David Douglas Duncan during the Vietnam War started putting on Nikon lenses on.
Huge part of our history. Yep.
Oh yeah, and I had dinner with him when he was 99 in Switzerland. He had an exhibition there, and what an amazing guy he was. We lost him a couple of years ago, but and I know
I love how editors were screaming at, what are you taking these pictures with? They're so sharp. And it
exactly.
was glass, it was Nikon's lenses. So great history there. But again, Mark, thank you so much for giving us your time, putting these pictures together and telling us the stories. Those of you tuning in, please go check out Mark's work. Now on Instagram, it's Mark Edward Harris Photo, correct?
Correct, that's correct.
And Mark Edward Harris, just Google it and you'll see his webpage and a lot of the work he's done. Please check out these stories. The story you mentioned before was written by Diane Birkenfeld, Learn and Explore. So what you mentioned about the orangutans was on our website, Nikon USA, Learn and Explore, and Diane Birkenfeld, great writer and editor, put that together. So thank you for that too. Mark, again, a pleasure. I can't wait until we see each other again in person.
I look forward to that.
Be safe. Thank you so much. And those of you tuning in, go ahead. Say again?
That's right. And continue the great work with this series. It is an endless source of inspiration.
I've learned so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you. So those of you tuning in, another great session with Mark Edward Harris here. Please check out nikonusa.com/creators hour so you can check out all of these interviews as Mark has suggested. We want you to be inspired and we want you to want to get out there and take pictures. So we're working our way back into a little bit of normalcy. Let's keep moving forward. Please take some great pictures. Share them with us. Mark, after this, you're going to do an AMA, Ask Me Anything. So those of you that want to jump into Nikon's Instagram page, you'll be able to ask Mark some questions. So please do that. So for Nikon, I am Mike Corrado. Everybody get out there, take some great pictures, and be safe.